Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry, and I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. I hope you're all having a great day today. Today, we're going to be reacting to another top 10 list, and this one's called Top 10 U.S. Presidents Who Changed the Course of History. So this is by a popular list channel, WatchMojo, and it's a normie channel, I know, but it's good to see the normie interpretation of history sometimes. All right, let's see if we think they are the top 10. All right, let's get started. All right, I'm interested to see how much recency bias there's going to be here. I think the more normie the channel, the more recency is going to be important because everyone thinks that what's happening right now is the most important and impactful thing that's ever happened in history, especially the less you know about history. So we'll see how they do that, or if they really go back to the beginning. I mean, like, how can you not have George Washington, you know, Abraham Lincoln, etc.? There's so many older presidents to see, but I'm really interested to see what they have there. And I want to see if you guys agree with their list. Let's get a discussion going in the comments. All right, let's do this.
There was something about John F. Kennedy from the very beginning.
I think Kennedy's
Welcome
important.
to WatchMojo, and today we're counting down the American presidents who, for better or worse, changed history the most.
He, more than any other single person, had created the United States.
Number 10, Harry S. Truman. The 33rd president significantly altered the course of American and global history.
No other president of the United States has been called upon to do so much in such a brief period of time that is of such great importance to the future security and prosperity of all mankind.
I think what I'm afraid is going to happen. So what I think I'm afraid is going to happen is I'm going to sit there and be like, yeah, that person top 10 done this. And then I'm going to like just forget a president. I don't have like a list of presidents in front of me or anything like that. Maybe I should have or something, but like, you know, and I'm going to like forget one because I might be like, okay, yeah, they should be in there, shouldn't. So like Truman, well, let's get to their argument first and I'll tell you what I think.
After Franklin D. Roosevelt's death, Truman's decision to use atomic bombs against Japan hastened the end of World War II and inaugurated the nuclear age. He implemented the Marshall Plan, revitalizing war-torn Europe and containing communism, and established the Truman Doctrine, foundational to Cold War policy.
The Marshall Plan provided economic aid to the countries of Western Europe.
Domestically, Truman desegregated the armed forces, setting a precedent for civil rights advancements. His leadership during pivotal moments, including the Korean War and the recognition of Israel, underscored his lasting impact on U.S. foreign policy and societal progress.
In retirement, he refused to profit personally through speaking or
Dewey beats Truman,
noting that as president, he'd tried never to forget who he was and where he was returning. He died the day after Christmas in 1972 at age 88.
I know it's right.
Number 9.
That's good to have. At least you got that Christmas. We're going to have Wilson here. Okay. I was going to say Truman. Yeah. Truman set the precedent for American foreign policy going forward. Being the person that, you know, authorizes the use of the atomic bombs, that's obviously changing everything. And then immediately moving into the Cold War and trying to take an aggressive stance against the Soviet Union, which is definitely a reason why the Americans use the atomic bomb too, is to intimidate the Russians, basically. But yeah, and then Truman Doctrine. So Truman Doctrine basically states, to put it in the real applicable, not the wording of it, but how it's been essentially carried out, is the United States will intervene if communism is going to spread somewhere. Communism can exist where it exists, but if it's going to threaten, they would say, like, you know, democracies or the free world or something, very vague terminology. But essentially what it was is, if communism is going to spread to a new country, the United States will intervene, right? Whether it's indirectly with proxy wars or directly with something like the Korean War, Vietnam. And then how it went down also with CIA and coups to take out communist leaders and socialist leaders and all that stuff, set that precedent, and it absolutely defines the United States from then really until now. Absolutely. So Truman for sure. All right, Wilson, I want to see what their take's going to be on this. Is it going to be more World War I related, or in the domestic policies that, of course, Wilson gets a lot of hate for?
Woodrow Wilson. Serving from 1913 to 1921, Wilson's tenure was marked by significant domestic reforms known as the New Freedom, which included...
So I was originally, I don't think I would have put him in a pre-top 10 list that I would have made.
Included the establishment of the Federal Reserve System and the Federal Trade Commission, aimed at increasing economic oversight and fairness. Wilson's leadership during World War I and his subsequent push for the League of Nations reshaped international relations, promoting...
Well, the United States never joined the League of Nations.
The idea of collective security and diplomacy
failed, so.
over warfare.
He had this extraordinary confidence that his was the right, that he was the special vehicle of the Lord, that he spoke the truth.
Like
so that
divinely
opposition
inspired.
became almost, in that definition, sacrilegious.
Though the U.S. Senate did not ratify the Treaty of Versailles and the U.S. never joined the League, Wilson's vision laid the groundwork for the future United Nations.
I pose this question almost every time I somehow mention, it comes to mentioning the United States not joining the League of Nations. If the United States joined the League of Nations, would the League of Nations have been stronger and more likely to intervene in the events that led to World War II? So essentially, if the United States had joined, would World War II still have happened? Comment down below.
And in these last days of his life, he can only hope that someday other men will raise high the banners which he had carried with such dedication.
His advocacy for self-determination and new international order marked
Which
a
still didn't
decisive
happen,
shift
though.
in U.S. foreign policy,
Self-determination
despite
happened
his controversial
almost
legacy on
nowhere.
domestic civil liberties and racial segregation.
Wilson was also noted for opposing prohibition. He correctly thought it would be unenforceable, but he was unable to prevent its official ratification in 1919.
Yeah.
Number 8.
Okay, so I was going to say, maybe not in a top 10. Again, I need to put all these down in writing and stuff, just because so many things he advocated for are so against like what people believe now. So many things. Yeah, he had these racist policies and a lot of things about the economy and all that, like, have become unpopular. He's been recollected now as very unpopular, especially in history communities now. So that's why I wouldn't do it, is because so many opinions are against and have reversed some of his ideas. All right, Reagan for top 10 to change the course of history. That, again, I got to put a list together here, but wouldn't have been like one of my original like first thoughts. But let's see the argument.
Ronald Reagan. This president's economic policies, known as Reaganomics, were aimed at reducing the size of government, cutting taxes, and deregulating industries.
Temporarily.
Which proponents credit with stimulating economic growth and ending the stagflation of the 1970s.
Reaganomics wasn't just about tax cuts. The policy had 3 other central points.
It was the most attractive part, though, for voters.
Businesses, turning government services over to private contractors, and decreasing spending on domestic social programs.
Now, we'll say that is like a legacy for sure, that we've probably never fully we have not gone back to pre-Reaganomics, really. Businesses are still way more deregulated, than before. And the idea that would boost the economy could happen, but there's of course other effects. You can look into Reaganomics, and the idea of that's tied with that often is like trickle down economics, that if the health of big private industry is good, that'll trickle down to everybody, and that the wages will go up and all this other stuff. But that didn't really happen to the effect that a lot of people believe, and it's turned a lot of people's beliefs against the idea of trickle down economics, that doesn't work, or at least not work to the idea that people want it to. So I think they're probably going to get into the Cold War here too, and see if they make an argument that if they think like he was directly responsible for like the fall of the Soviet Union, that'd be a very American centric point of view. To place probably a bigger percentage than anyone else. I mean, yeah, he put pressure, but let's see what
the Soviet Union, epitomized by his call to, quote, tear down this wall in Berlin,
call them the evil empire.
Strategic defense initiatives played a key role in ending the Cold War. His administration's emphasis on conservative social values and a strong national defense shifted the political landscape in the U.S., reviving American patriotism and influencing the global balance of power.
Okay, no. It's not like we were on the course for all this pro-communism stuff going on. Remember, anti-communism was was not a partisan thing. It didn't matter if you were a Republican or Democrat. Every president campaigned on containing the Soviet Union, to some degree into communism. He did not like change the course the United States was heading there. That absolutely did not happen.
Ronald Reagan spoiled us.
He did come down very hard. I mean, he started using very harsh terminology. I told you a second ago here, that idea that like they're an evil empire and all that stuff. But it's not like that was like controversial in the United States, or like that much of a hot take. It was more of a hot take if you're like, a communist or something outside of the United States, and you're like, wow, evil. Okay, well, let's have a debate about communism, capitalism, and the evilness of it or whatever.
He told us we could have our cake and eat it too. I would say that history will say America became a spoiled child under Ronald Reagan.
Reagan's legacy is marked by his charismatic
That's actually
leadership,
pretty good.
promotion of free market policies, and contributions to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, making him a transformative figure in late 20th century history.
I had no idea that in my lifetime I would see the collapse of the Soviet system. Never.
Number 7.
Remember, there are a lot of things that led to the Soviet collapse. The 80s was rough. Okay, that war in Afghanistan for the Soviet Union was a disaster. Things like Chernobyl was both an economic, environmental, and a political disaster. Okay, and trying to keep up with the arms race in the early 80s, all of these things led to collapse. And yeah, some of them were because of trying to compete with the United States, economically speaking, which to try to keep up, they had to put in more and more policies that could be repressive or just could be not economically sound. You know what I mean? All right, LBJ. Change course of history. I think you can put him in top 10. He is really going to start the demographic voting. They call it what's the stupid name they use it, like the Great Flip or whatever, where like the South starts voting for like Republicans and North starts voting for Democrats. And he kind of was a big part of that in the way with the Civil Rights Act and splitting the Democratic Party up between like the old school Southern old school Southern Democrats versus like the progressive Democrats that were there too, up like in the North, splitting that up. So the flip, or what's the name for it? I can't believe I don't know, because I used to talk about this, but he is instrumental that way, and with the Civil Rights Act and all that stuff.
Lyndon B. Johnson. The acerbic Johnson served from 1963 to 1969 and fundamentally transformed American
Democrat
society
Texas,
through his domestic policies.
This is a man who truly wanted to make a difference in his world.
He wanted to do anything he could to level the playing field.
His vision of a, quote, great society led to landmark legislation such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin.
And remember, that split a lot of people both in the Democratic Party and Republican Party about supporting the policies of this, like with the Civil Rights Act. That's where you really start to see the shakeup of the demographics of which parts of the country start voting for other different parts, and how platforms started to change. You know what I mean? Like Lyndon Johnson was noted as saying, is really wanting to push for the black vote in the United States. And whether you believe that was purely a political move or something more nefarious, whatever, because there's arguments to be had there. But nevertheless, changing the focus and like the targeted groups for the political groups, he did a big part of that with the Democratic Party, of trying to get African American voters to the Democratic Party.
And the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting. Johnson's administration also created Medicare and Medicaid, significantly expanding health care access, and passed environmental protection laws
Medicare,
and
Medicaid.
Education funding support.
So he has a range
Basically New Deal
of
2.0
programs that he
society.
is able to pass through in kind of a record amount of time.
There's a lot of
like a year and a
legislation.
half, over 100 pieces of legislation.
However, his presidency was deeply marred by the escalation of the Vietnam War, which significantly eroded his popularity and overshadowed his domestic achievements.
Now, looking at Lyndon Johnson, I think
He's really starting to become unpopular.
I think history happens to agree with me, namely that he was a great president with one of the greatest tragic mistakes that this country ever made, which was Vietnam. And
Probably would have a different recollection.
Without question, the unity of the country, or the majority force together.
Number 6.
And whether you're like an LBJ fan or not, there's a lot of things going on different arguments made with him. He was impactful, so I do think he belongs in a top 10. Roosevelt, I think so, as a progressive, really one of the first real progressive to hit the presidency there. during the height of the Industrial Revolution and the trust busting and stuff. I think in a lot of ways, we'll see what they say about it, about putting a little bit of the brakes on for just the completely unchecked amount of industrial capitalism going on in the turn of the century. Just completely, just no intervention at all, like with the companies doing whatever they want. Of course, you look at a list of top 10 richest people, like in history, they're all industrialists, okay, from this era, and at least putting some of the brakes on just a little bit before the train, I don't want to say derails or whatever people think it was going to be. So maybe more of at the bottom of a top 10.
Theodore Roosevelt. This renowned figure in American history was known for his exuberant personality and versatile policies that forever changed the nation's direction.
Roosevelt presented himself as the reasonable alternative to the radicals. Constructive change offers the best method of avoiding destructive change, he argued. Reform is the antidote to revolution.
He was a driving force behind the progressive movement.
Reform is the gentle version of revolution. That's really, I guess, what it should be. He thought that maybe they're going for a revolution. I mean, maybe that's true. You know what I mean? This is the turn of the century where socialist movements are growing strong in industrial countries. Okay, because again, it was just laissez-faire economics that was popular in the industrial world, where industry just kind of did its own thing, whatever it wanted. And then all the negative effects that came out with that, with working conditions and disparity of wealth and all of those sorts of things was just so common, right? And that's the conditions for which socialism in different countries was growing strong. So maybe they're saying there, if he had not intervened, would United States have turned to a full out kind of workers' revolution of some kind? Now it's hard to maybe think about that as much as like when you look at like the Russian Revolution, which had to go with an absolute monarchy, and their conditions were very different than the United States too. You're still literally talking about feudalism in the 20th century and serfdom, so you can't compare the conditions totally with that. But could there have been something down the road that could have left with that without maybe a president coming in and, I don't know if you want to say compromising between the sides, where like you're still going to have capitalism and all that stuff, but there's going to be safety nets. There's going to be breaking up of trusts and of monopolies, and making sure the government does protect at least minimal rights of workers and getting that legacy. So eventually you're going to get things like insurance and minimum wage and 40-hour work weeks and stuff that's going to come down the road later, but at least starting to see that intervention.
Advocating for the conservation of natural resources, which led to the establishment of numerous national
He was also an imperialist too, though.
Roosevelt's commitments to the, quote, square deal domestic policies promoted fairness for workers, consumers, and businesses, laying the groundwork for modern consumer protection and labor rights.
He used the Oval Office as a bully pulpit to preach the virtues of vigorous physical activity and social reform. He bellowed against corporate greed and crooked politicians. He was, in short, a pistol.
Internationally, he was instrumental in negotiating the end of the Russo-Japanese War, for which he won the Nobel Peace Prize. And he played a key role in the construction of the Panama Canal, expanding America's naval power and influence.
Perhaps the only thing that can be easily understood about him is that he was an original.
Number 5.
Okay.
James.
Yeah, I think he's important for I guess the course of history changing, of starting to actually have government intervention in the economy. I think that's important. Okay. Madison, we'll see what they put in here. I mean, he drafts the Constitution and stuff, but like policy wise, let's see what they do. So they're actually numbering them. So this is in the middle of those ones. So I actually think that some of the ones that we saw earlier could be up higher, like Truman, I think could be in a top 5 up there. But yeah, I'm just to see what else.
The 4th President of the United States played a crucial role in shaping the nation's early years. Known as the father of the Constitution, his contributions to the drafting of the Constitution and the Federalist Papers.
But okay, I mean, people talk about drafting the Constitution. It's not like he invented all the stuff in it. It was all agreed upon and discussed and all that stuff. There were conventions about that. It's not like he just wrote the whole thing and was like, all right, guys, here's our Constitution. Let's pass it. You know what I mean?
Pivotal in defining the framework of American democracy.
And at just 36, he personally wrote much of the United States Constitution, the document that would serve as the foundation.
There weren't like unique ideas to him, though. That's
Madison's time at the top was marked by the War of 1812 against Britain, often called America's Second War of Independence, which challenged the young nation's sovereignty and resilience.
It was a disaster. One of the rare times Madison failed to think through an important policy decision. The United States simply wasn't prepared for war.
His leadership.
I mean, that's true. We didn't have an army. Like, this is before you have like the military that we think of today. It's pretty much non-existent at that time, because that's just not what U.S. was prioritizing in those early years too. So I guess if you thought that Americans should have been this like crazy military power out of the gate, I guess you would look at him negatively. I don't know if that would be, because that was a PragerU clip of, you know, them being getting a lot more pro-military,
despite initial
spending,
unpreparedness and setbacks, eventually led to a sense of national pride and unity. Madison also oversaw the admission of new states to the Union and the establishment of the Second Bank of the United States, reflecting his evolving views on federal power.
James Madison is such an extraordinary figure because
I originally wasn't thinking he'd be in the top 10,
like someone
like
who would
honorable
play
mention.
Such an important role.
Number 4, John
so
F.
yeah, like 5 now. JFK 4, I was thinking maybe a little bit lower than that. Mostly for Cold War and the cooling of the Cold War. That should be his biggest thing.
Kennedy. The so-called Camelot era, though brief, profoundly impacted American politics, culture, and foreign policy.
The way he came across, his rhetoric, the notes of idealism that he struck.
Every one of us will go home with the most profound impression of what a strong, vital people can accomplish.
Kennedy's charismatic leadership and visionary speeches inspired a generation, promoting ideals of public service and civic responsibility, encapsulated in his famous injunction, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country."
He was the youngest man ever elected to the office and also the first president born in the 20th century.
Domestically, Kennedy advocated for civil rights, pushing for legislation that would later culminate in significant civil rights acts under his successor.
He also, though, tried to avoid, he didn't believe in like incredibly drastic civil rights legislation. He didn't think you'd throw it all out at once because, I mean, you already saw with LBJ, who comes after him, there was plenty of backlash against some of that stuff and maybe saying it's going too far. And he was somebody like, JFK, who thought that, again, being too radical with giving too many civil rights things kind of at the same time would end up, causing a lot of civil discord. That was kind of what his thought was. He did believe in, more civil rights, but didn't think you could just jump in the deep end.
Internationally, he navigated the Cold War's treacherous waters, most notably during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt.
This is where he's, I think, the most
this
important.
clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations.
Kennedy's initiatives like the Peace Corps and the space program aiming to land a man on the moon highlighted his forward-looking approach. Despite his untimely death, Kennedy's legacy of hope and transformative leadership endures in American memory.
All right. Now, we also, though, have to make sure with Kennedy that we also, yes, he helped cool down the Cold War, but he also expanded the height of it with the awful things like the Bay of Pigs invasion, right? Like, look how that's what, like, so much in a way led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the height that we talk about of the closest the United States and Soviet Union ever got to, to nuclear war was also escalated by him okaying that mission, the Bay of Pigs, which that mission actually goes back to the Eisenhower era. But when he becomes president, he learns about that the CIA has been, doing this. And of course, about the whole Bay of Pigs thing, it ends up, of course, being a massive failure to take out Fidel Castro, which then really creates a strong alliance between the Soviet Union and Cuba, which is going to eventually get to the missiles and all that stuff. So it's like he cooled it down, but he also escalated it with some early failures that way. So, but I do think him ending the presidency, cooling it down, was very important, and why, he could probably be on this list, but probably I think a little bit further down, of a 10 though, but yeah.
Number 3, George Washington.
Absolutely.
Washington understood that if he failed, the country would fail. It was
maybe
that
number
simple.
1.
This American icon's tenure set numerous precedents that fundamentally shaped the American presidency and the early government. As the nation's first president, Washington established the practice of a two-term limit, a tradition that was followed until Franklin D. Roosevelt and later codified in the 22nd Amendment.
I think that's one of the most important things that George Washington ever did for setting precedents for what the future of being a president was going to be like. United States was still not knowing what it was going to look like, and setting a precedent that being president is not going to be this lifelong thing. Even if you are getting voted and you're popular, the idea of stepping away, even if you are popular, set a very important precedent, because that's going to prevent, again, these lifetime office holders and hopefully get you a step further away from people just becoming lifelong dictators. You know what I mean? And really corrupting that system. I think that was maybe the most important thing he ever did. And one of the most important things, I think, for the United States ever. Maybe I'm putting a little too much stake in it, but over time, I've grown to really, really appreciate how powerful of a decision that was from Washington.
His leadership in creating the first cabinet and the inaugural address set standards for governance.
Certainly, his first cabinet is probably the best we've ever had. When you have Hamilton at Treasury and Jefferson at State and Henry Knox at War, it just makes every subsequent one look like a pickup team.
That's true. It was full of talent. I mean, that first cabinet, it's going to be full of future presidents and just people that have gone down in history books. He definitely surrounded himself with the popular talent of that time. But again, it's just important to set these standards right now so that people, in the future have something to look back and hopefully lead to less corruption going forward. And we don't just become, the United States doesn't just become the countries they were trying to avoid being, and establishing monarchies and, whatever.
Address further advised future generations on the importance of national unity, the dangers of partisan divisiveness, and the value of a foreign policy of neutrality. Washington's tenure was marked by his commitment to small r Republican values, the establishment of a strong federal government, and the precedence of a peaceful transition of power.
He resigned his military command and went home to Mount Vernon. By stepping down, Washington raised himself up as the embodiment of Republican heroism.
Number 2, Franklin D. Roosevelt.
FDR. Yeah, top 5 for sure. He changed what it was. He changed the idea, almost personally, changed what the role of government is going to be. He expanded the government probably more than anybody ever has. And establishing also, I guess, a precedent, you should say, that the government will intervene directly into the lives of people when all else sort of fails. That the government can actually step in to attempt to improve the conditions directly into people's lives with that. Now, you got to understand the context of it is the Great Depression, where everything failed leading up to that. And the government was pretty much the only thing left to be able to intervene to improve the lives of everyday Americans at that time. But we've also never returned back to that. For example, we've been in debt ever since this. We used to not have, I know this may be crazy to believe, we used to not have national debt. But going to the debt to the New Deal has also set a precedent that debt is acceptable to have in the country, in the government.
FDR was the only president elected to 4 terms. His time in office significantly altered American society and
it was also a very different time.
Particularly through his New Deal program, which aims to address the Great Depression's devastating effects.
His visionary ability to make the case for his ideas.
I want to talk with you about a number of subjects that directly affect the future of the United States.
The New Deal included wide-ranging policies.
He was a president that felt like he wanted to be a president that you felt like was in your home talking to. That's why he did those fireside chats during the Depression. That was what he wanted. Somebody you could feel was sitting in your living room. That's what he was going for there.
Relief for the unemployed, recovery of the economy, and reform of the financial system, including the creation of the Social Security system, establishment of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and implementation of labor protections.
He really changed the framework of the rules of the economy so that the banks, the brokers,
incredible amount of regulation going in and government intervention. Like we'd never seen before.
Much more humane standards.
Roosevelt's leadership during World War II was pivotal, shifting the United States from a policy of isolation to becoming a leader on the world stage.
That actor
when
supposed
he
to be
goes
FDR?
to the joint session of Congress, that anger and fury are underneath the resolve and determination, and it was just exactly what people needed to hear.
His Fireside Chats, a series of informal radio broadcasts, helped bolster American morale during these challenging times.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get all of them.
Number one.
Okay, so, one, I mean, obviously, you knew they'd be Lincoln if they hadn't brought him up to this point. But yeah, FDR, whether you agree that he went too far in government intervention at this time, whatever, you know, that's beside the point that he absolutely changed history. Absolutely changed history of what the government is, what the president could do. He was very, very powerful person and definitely changed, the course for American history. Okay. All right, Lincoln, number one. I'm sorry, number one. Okay, yes, the slavery stuff and all that, but number one, think of all the people that were just talked about here. By the way, somebody that I thought would be on this list would be Jefferson. I thought Jefferson would be there with like Louisiana Purchase, and I don't want to go too much other deep dive, but I thought maybe Jefferson would be up here. I'm trying to think of others now that I've seen this would probably up there. I am impressed, by the way, that they did not go very recent. The most recent was Reagan, right? That they put on this list, which I don't think should be in a top 10, but I am good. Props on WatchMojo for not having too much recency bias. Anyways, I'm going to think a little bit more as they talk about
Abraham Lincoln. Honest Abe's leadership during the Civil War preserved the Union, abolished slavery, strengthened the federal government, and modernized the U.S. economy. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, a decisive move that shifted the war's focus to the abolition of slavery.
As he prepared for...
It was always about slavery, but Emancipation Proclamation made it official, you know, because before they were saying it without saying it. Now they're saying it with saying it.
For the second,
but remember, Emancipation Proclamation only freed slaves in states that were in open rebellion, that had seceded, basically, because remember there were states, especially those border states, that had slavery, legalized slavery, but didn't join the Confederacy, and it only was supposed to take effect into the countries or the states in rebellion.
Inaugural address. He wanted to make clear to everybody that he, Lincoln, understood that the war had been a war to free the slaves.
His dedication to the principle that all men are created equal led to the passage of the 13th Amendment, which made slavery unconstitutional. His assassination in April 1865 marked the first assassination of a U.S. president and left the nation without its principal leader during the critical
Not the first
period of
attempt, the
Reconstruction.
first successful.
Just think of it. For Lincoln,
you guys thinking number one
this
for Lincoln? I mean,
war
he's
has come to an
obviously
end.
on the list, but like,
and he's able to feel a sense of the country is going to go forward. I've done my
I'm not saying
part
best
as a
presidents,
leader,
saying presidents that changed
he only has
history.
5 days to appreciate that before he's killed.
Influential, I
Drives me
guess you should
crazy.
say.
Lincoln's legacy as a symbol of freedom, justice, and the unyielding belief in the unity of the United States endures, making him one of the most revered figures in American
And that's true.
After his death,
that's not what this list
the
is.
image Lincoln
That's not what
helped
this list
create
is.
rises
His
to
favorite
take his
presidents
place.
or whatever.
Which other presidents do you think should be on this list and
Or
why?
even best.
Let us know in the comments.
Okay. Final thoughts. All right, so I just, again, thinking about other additions off the top of my head, I think Jefferson should go in a top 10. I think you can lower Wilson. I think you can lower Reagan as well, although very much in like the honorable mention, because again, we're talking top 10 here. But I guess for the most part, most of them would probably be on my list or arranged differently there, as you heard me throughout the video. So with that, I'd like to hear what you all think. Top 10. Remember what we're going for here. The list was top 10 U.S. presidents who changed the course of history, not best presidents or the ones I liked or whatever it is. It's like who changed history. And I think maybe we can call that like most influential, whatever. But yeah, what do you guys have to say about that? You can let me know down below. All right. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.